Horn is a managing director at Deloitte Consulting, where he is a lead client service partner, LCSP, Medicare and Medicare Services, CMS, and State of North Carolina accounts. As the LCSP for Deloitte's CMS and North Carolina's accounts, Dr. Horn is responsible for driving services excellence and managing risk, developing the account leaders and team, and delivering strong financial performance. Now, prior to coming to Deloitte, Dr. Horn served from 2001 to 2007 as Assistant Secretary for Children and Families within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Horn also has served as the Commissioner for Children, Youth, and Families and Chief of the Children's Bureau within HHS and a member of the National Commission on Children, the Commission to Eliminate Child Abuse and Neglect Fatalities, the National Commission on Childhood Disability, the President Commission on Special Education, the U.S. Advisory Board on Welfare Indicators, the U.S. Advisory Board on Kinship Care, and the U.S. Advisory Committee on Head Start Research and Evaluation. Dr. Horn is also a co founder and the first president of the National Fatherhood Initiative, also known as NFI, and has been an adjunct faculty at Georgetown University Public Policy Institute and affiliate scholar with the Hudson Institute. Dr. Horn also has extensive experience in provision of direct services, including as the director of outpatient psychological services at the Children's Hospital National Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and co director of the Michigan State University Psychological Clinic. Dr. Horn received his PhD in clinical child psychology from Southern Illinois University. Dr. Horn, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here with you.
Wow, that's quite a bit of a resume.
I'm exhausted.
Well, and I'm just finding out about the NFI. I am also a facilitator with them and doing quite well as far as partnering with them. I never knew that when I met you that you had any affiliation with that organization.
Yeah, there were three of us that co-founded the National Father Initiative. Myself, Don Eberly, and David Blankenhorn. And we founded it back in 1994 because we were concerned about the fact that an increasing number of children were growing up in homes without their fathers or without their father being involved actively in their lives. And when we looked at the research about the effect that fatherlessness has on children, what we found is that on almost any measure you can imagine, children who grow up without an involved, committed, and responsible father in their lives do less well than those who do have a father in their lives. They're more likely to have an emotional behavioral problem. They're more likely to fail at school, more likely to get in trouble with the law, more likely to drink alcohol at a young age or to do drugs. It really was stunning research. And we said, if we wanted to do something to improve the lives and well-being of children in America, one place to start, and it's not the only place to start, but one place to start is to help men be involved in the lives of their kids in positive ways.
I'm so glad you talked about that, because that just is a lead way segment into our discussion, many discussions that we're going to have this evening. But I don't think I've shared with you, or maybe I have, your audience. You are speaking to over 150 countries. And one of the things that I also put Dr. Blackenhorn in my dissertation when I wrote on fatherhood. And the things that I often quote is where he says the most destructive trend of our society today is fatherlessness in every country. And as these viewers are hearing this conversation, they're in those countries. And I'm sure that they too can agree the effects that it has on society in terms of social illness, and how, as you spoke about just briefly, just a few of these things, how it impacts our society, how it impacts our communities, as well as how it impacts our families. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
you're exactly correct. This is not, it's not just that kids in the United States need involved, committed, and responsible fathers. It seems that everywhere uh, where there is a human society, that children do better when they have the love, commitment, and devotion of both their mom and their dads, and that both their moms and their dads are actively involved in their lives in positive ways. So it's interesting to hear you're broadcasting to 150 countries, because while the extent of fatherlessness may vary from country to country, the fact that fathers make a difference, a positive difference in the lives of their kids, is not unique to the United States. It's everywhere.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Let me ask you, what inspired your interest in the responsible fatherhood?
So you mentioned in my bio that I'm a child clinical psychologist, and so I went to graduate school because I care about the well-being of children, and and started out my career as a academic research psychologist at Michigan State University. Then went to Children's Hospital, and one of the things I started to notice was that um, when children have either an absent or a distant father, or in a worse circumstance, an abusive father, they often wind up in the clinics where I was a therapist.
Hmm.
And that one of the things that I did early on in my career in terms of doing family therapy is to try to help men as fathers be more engaged in positive ways with their kids. And what I found is that in many instances, when you did that, things got better,
Hmm.
for the kid. So then I served as the commissioner for the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families at HHS. And at that time, there was a secretary, Lewis Sullivan, a medical doctor from at Harvard Medical School. He's now a professor or chairman emeritus at Morehouse. And he was very concerned about African American fathers and African American men. And he started an initiative that when I was at HHS, um, where it was sort of an outreach to African American men. And not just in their roles of fathers, but helping them with employment and so forth. Um, and so I got involved in that, and it reinforced this notion uh, of the positive impact that father presence and involvement has on children, and not just African American children, but Hispanic children, Asian American children, white children, and so forth. And so, just by coincidence, I was having breakfast with Don Everly one day, and I'd never met him before.
Hmm.
So I think this is God's hand. Okay, this was not planned. So he called me up out of the blue and he said, "I'd like to have breakfast with you." I said, "Okay, great." So we had breakfast, and we said niceties and so forth. And then he asked, "If you're a child psychologist, right?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "If you could do one thing to significantly improve the well-being of children in America, what would it be?" And without hesitation, I said, "Get more fathers involved in the lives of their kids." And he said, "I've been thinking the exact same thing. And I'm putting a small group of people together to think through this problem. Would you be willing to come for a couple of days and sit around a table and try to problem solve this?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to." So we went there. There were about 8 of us. And Charles Ballard, who is a giant in this field,
Hmm.
was there. And that's where the idea of the National Father Initiative was born. It was about drawing attention to the fact that fathers mattered. Because as David Blankenhorn wrote in his book, Fatherless America, we were in danger at that time of losing the father idea, the
Hmm.
idea that fathers matter. And if you lose the idea, you don't be surprised if you lose the fact, the thing.
Hmm.
Okay. So we said, well, the primary goal of the National Fatherhood Initiative was to recapture the idea that fathers were important, that fathers mattered. Because without that understanding, if we just think fathers, kind of nice to have around, they play with the kids once in a while, and sure, their money is important, but they're not really that important for anything else. If we believe that, then why? And that's the thing we communicate in the culture to men. Why would we expect men to be inspired to be engaged with their kids' lives in much more important ways than just giving money, providing money? And I'm not saying money is not important. Money, of course, is important. So that was our idea. Our idea was to say small, strategic, to recapture this idea that fathers matter.
I just got back from the Bahamas a few months ago, and had a chance to speak with some young people about their fathers. And one young lady said, "I don't care about fathers. I have my mommy, and that was what her uh, experience was as far as with her father. I don't think her father was active in her life. I don't think she understood how that impacted her because of her age, and it was just sad to see that her father was discounted or wasn't an important factor of her life. I wanted to ask you. I know you were very instrumental in obtaining significant federal funding for the fatherhood for the fatherhood field beginning in 2005 and 2006. Could you talk about the role you played in getting the United States Congress to begin investing significant dollars into fatherhood initiatives?
Yeah, so at that time, I was the Assistant Secretary for Children and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And so one of the things first things I did when I became Assistant Secretary is I did a survey of the programs that I oversaw. And they were quite diverse: Head Start, child care, child welfare, refugee resettlement, um, the TANF program, or welfare to work kind of things. And I looked at those programs with the lens of how do they treat fathers? How do they treat men? And one of the things that was revealing is that most of those systems were very much welcoming of and supportive of mothers, which is a good thing. That's a great thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. But guys and fathers tended to be an afterthought, if they thought about them at all. And so a lot of those systems were set up with the idea of how do we support moms? Great mission. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's sort of a half of that equation, that parental equation, that was missing. And so I challenged each of those programs to start to think about how do we incorporate men, and particularly fathers, into these various programs, whether it's Head Start or child care, child welfare, or whatever. And they started doing that. And then it occurred to me that it might be useful to have some very targeted funding. Because believe it or not, there's never been targeted funding for fatherhood programs at the federal level before this. None, zero. And so I said, what if we had some targeted money so that it wasn't just, okay, we'll add on a fatherhood component, which is great, which is perfect, very needed, to Head Start or to child welfare programs. But also, what if we had a funding stream that was very specific, at its core was about reaching out to men as fathers and helping them, equipping them, and motivating them, and supporting them in being involved fathers in the lives of their kids. So I came up with this idea, and I'd like to say that I brought that idea up to Congress, and the next week they created this program. It didn't quite go that quickly. It took some convincing over time. One of the things that we had done when I was with the National Father Initiative, which was before being Assistant Secretary, is we had established a bipartisan commission on fatherhood in the United States Senate and bipartisan commission of fatherhood in those in the U.S. House of Representatives. And so what that did is when I became assistant secretary, it gave me a natural network to go to like say, hey, remember that stuff we used to do together when I was with the National Father Initiative? What would you think about passing some legislation, creating a new program to help fathers be good fathers? And with that network in both the United States Senate and the House, eventually back in 2005, legislation was introduced, and $150 million was dedicated to working with fathers, and another $150 million was dedicated to helping couples form and sustain healthy marriages. And interestingly enough, one of the United States senators I worked with at that time was someone by the name of Barack Obama, who
Okay.
I think went on to a higher office, if I remember
Yes, sir.
and was very, very supportive throughout his presidency of the fatherhood work.
Yeah, I noticed he has a name that I was actually going to call my organization before I called it Man to Man. I slept on it and put a pause on it, and he got it. Is my brother's keepers. That was going to be my first initial name for our organization, and I saw that he was really, and he's still doing things because I get emails about that organization and the work that he's doing still, even after
Yeah.
his office. I want to also want to know if you could discuss some of the challenges you and your colleagues encountered in order to make that happen.
Well, one of them was a suspicion, which I can understand, that is this somehow anti-woman?
Mhm.
So uh, he did. So why focused on fathers? Are you saying that moms don't matter? And no. What I used to say is that look, in 9 out of 10 times where there's a parent missing from a home, it's the father, not the mother. If that were reversed, I'd start a national motherhood initiative. And so, the moms are there, and they're engaged. And so part of that was this overcoming the suspicion that somehow this was anti-woman, anti-mother. The other thing was about domestic violence.
Mhm.
And so, the suspicion was, well, some of these guys aren't such great guys. And are you saying that, a woman should, encourage an abusive father to stay involved in the lives of their kids? And I said, no, that we're talking about responsible fatherhood, not abusive fatherhood.
Mhm.
And so as part of the grants that we gave, when we did get that $150 million for fatherhood and another $150 million for healthy marriage, is we required that every grantee have a domestic violence protocol in place to make sure that we weren't doing harm in the name of doing good. And so two of the obstacles were, what is this anti-woman, and are you sensitive enough about domestic violence? And so we had to sort of spend a lot of time explaining what this is and what this is not. And part of the whole idea of calling it the Responsible Fatherhood Initiative and grant program is to emphasize the responsible, right?
Mhm.
Um, and and that doesn't mean that a guy who's been in challenging circumstances in the past can't become and can't be a great father. We also work with prison reentry programs for
Mhm.
men who found themselves in prison, and when they are released back into the community from prison, a lot of those guys have children,
Mhm.
and want to do it safely. But one of the what we know, there are two things that keep guys from being recidivists when it comes to when they're released from prison. Well, three things. First is God.
Mhm.
So men who are religious are become are less likely to recidive to be incarcerated again. Second
Mhm.
is a job.
Mhm.
Um, so if they can get jobs, they're less likely to commit crimes again. And the third is connection to family.
Mm-hmm.
So so it was kind of like, let's do those three things. If we do those three things, each of those we know has a positive impact in helping men stay away from criminal behavior, not getting recarcerated. If each of those individually, what if all three of those we did, help the men, connect with all three of those, and that's what we found, and so, we used to say, hey, look, we don't have any throwaway dads. There's no, there, you know, there are no throwaway dads. Some dads need some additional skill building. Some dads need some additional support. A dad coming out of prison needs a job. And so there's lots of other things that people need, but kids need fathers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's funny you say that because I'm doing just about every one of those things you just said.
Yes.
So I teach a 52-week domestic violence class that's mandated through the courts. I teach a fatherhood program in San Quentin State Prison, and I also share the faith part as well. And just um, it's just interesting you say that because it confirms that at least I'm heading in the right direction uh, in the things that you're just shared.
Well, those listening would have no reason to know this, but you and I have only met once before,
Mm-hmm.
and there was I felt an immediate connection to you, and the heart that you have for this work, uh, and and I didn't know any of those things about you before, and it only has deepened my affection for you, and uh, I have a sense we're going to be friends for a long time.
Absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that because it means a lot to me. I wanted to ask you, aside from providing necessary or important funding, what are your thoughts regarding other roles local, state, federal government should play in advancing responsible fatherhood opportunities for men who want to be supportive of their children's upbringing? For example, in the policies and the procedures of families or domestic relations courts, or with child support agencies, or with correctional facilities. I know that's a lot.
That's a lot. So, and I've got a long list. So, first of all, messaging matters. The message matters. So, if we think it's just a nice idea to have fathers involved in the lives of their kids, we're not going to accomplish very much. We need to understand the criticality of having fathers involved in the lives of their kids. That's number one. Number one is the messaging really matters. The second is we have to approach men differently than we approach women. Now, I'm about to say some things that I'm not suggesting that every guy has to be like this and every mother has to be like that. I'm not suggesting that there should be strict gender roles, but in general, what we find is that men uh, uh, interact with children in different ways than mothers do. So, for example, we know that uh, that men tend to interact with their kids in a much more energetic fashion. Women tend to be more soothing of their babies.
Mhm.
Uh, when my kids were small, my wife would get annoyed with me because she'd go upstairs and tuck the kids in bed and, she'd read them a bedtime story. And then she'd come downstairs and she would say, okay, they're about to go to sleep. Go say goodnight. And I'd go up there. And the next thing I know, we're jumping on the bed, jumping up and down on the beds. And she's yelling, what's going on up there? Guys are just much more vigorous interaction with children, and babies notice this. Even at 2 months of age, when a baby sees their father approaching them, their eyes get wide. They sort of look like, get excited, like something stimulating is about. This isn't 2-month-old babies. And when mothers approach their babies, they tend to relax. And it's not that one's better than the other. It's different, right?
Mhm.
We also know that guys tend to be more encouraging of achievement and risk taking, whereas mothers are more encouraging of safety and comfort.
Mm-hmm.
So go to any playground in America and watch the way that fathers and mothers interact with their kids when their kids are on the jungle gym, climbing on the jungle gym.
Mm-hmm.
What are the fathers saying? Keep going. You're almost at the top. Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going. And what are the mothers saying? Oh, be careful. Be careful. Now, again, that doesn't mean there aren't some mothers that say keep going all the way to the top, and there aren't some fathers say be careful. I'm not saying that, but in general, that's the point I'm trying to make is that if we only encourage risk taking, what we would have is foolish risk takers. If we only encourage caution, we would have overly cautious kids. So isn't this wonderful complementary that we have, where we are now encouraging cautious risk taking,
Mm-hmm.
being risk taking, but being safe while doing risk taking, and that's what the moms and the dads tend to bring to that equation. So I think that we have to, in the programming that we do, recognize that mothers and fathers are different
Mm-hmm.
and that, or tend to be different. Again, I don't want to straitjacket anybody to strict, gender stereotypes. Um, but honor the fact that rather than telling the guys to stop telling those kids to climb up to the top of the jungle gym, what they do is that they honor the differences between moms and dads. And then finally, we have to approach men differently in our services than women. Now, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but I apologize for saying what I really believe. If you say to a bunch of men, here's the program we have. We're going to sit around in a circle. We're going to share our feelings. We're going to have a good cry and then a group hug. Most guys figure out that they've got something better to do than to go to that program.
Mm-hmm.
That's much more sort of a program that is attractive to some people, but not to a lot of men. So what we find in programming for fathers is you have to do outreach to them differently. So we see fatherhood programs that start out as a father basketball league.
Mm-hmm.
We see men getting together to repair a playground at a school. We see there's a great, wonderful program out there in California called Boot Camp for New Dads.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is it's specific. So it was started by a guy who was a pharmaceutical salesman, and he would go to hospitals and then he became a father. And what he noticed is that all the services were oriented towards the mom, and he was kind of an afterthought. So he said, there ought to be something for new fathers, not just new mothers. Okay. And so he created this program called Boot Camp for New Dads. And in that program, what he said was, guys, come, you got to bring your babies, and no moms are allowed.
Mm.
He said, because if the moms are there, what's going to happen? The moms are going to be over in one corner with the babies, and the guys will be in the other corner talking about sports.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, no, that's not what we want. We want the guys interacting with it. So if they've got their babies and they're holding their babies, they got to deal with them. And now I've got their attention. I can teach them how to diaper a baby, how to burp a baby, how to feed a baby. And very, very, it's just a different way of thinking about approaching men as fathers than traditional social services programs are structured.
Wow. That's interesting you say that because we had an orientation on Monday with these men in San Quentin. And we actually, of course, I try to create a space for them to feel like they can talk
Of
and that
course.
this is a safe place. And then I talked about, their relationships with their fathers and what kind of fathers did they have and what kind of fathers were they. And I tell you, I mean, it was 2 hours. And I mean, it was like these guys never had an opportunity to really actually share and be transparent and vulnerable about their experiences, one with their mother and father, and the experiences with their mother and father, how they interacted, as well as stepdads that came into their lives. And, based on that experience, was one that created a place where they got incarcerated, you know. And so it's interesting that you say that because it's easy for them to talk about sports, and sometimes that can mask how they really feel
That's right.
rather than, really deal with the root cause of how they feel, if that makes sense.
That's absolutely. And I'm not saying that men will not share feel. Of course they will, and you need to create a space for them. When I talk about how we approach men, it's really about how do we get them to come in the door.
Hmm.
Once they're
Hmm.
in the door, um, and then create that safe space as you did with those guys, they'll talk about this stuff because no one's ever asked them to talk about it before.
That's right.
Uh, but getting them in the door now in prisons, they're it's a little bit easier to get in the door because
Right. They already there.
right. But if you're a social service program and you're doing outreach in the community and trying to get fathers to come in, you might want to say, hey, we got this men's basketball league, and during the intermission, we're gonna talk about fatherhood,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then you could
Hmm.
play basketball and then do a little talking, and guys will open up. I remember some years ago there was a 60 Minutes segment on this guy. He was Monster Cody was his name, and he was in uh, maximum security federal prison, and he had been an enforcer for some gangs, and he'd killed people, and in not so kind ways. Um, and the interviewer was talking, and he talked emotionless about the murders he'd committed, no emotion.
Hmm.
And then the interviewer, I don't know why, said, "How about your father? Tell us about your father." I have no idea why the interviewer asked that. Immediately, tears came down his face, and he said, "That's heavy, man." He says, I can't talk about my father. That's too painful."
Mm. Mm.
Um, and you wonder, is there some connection? I think there is
Hmm.
between the pain that he felt because either father absence or abusive fathers or whatever, and the guy he became. He might have had a very different outcome if there had been an involved committed father in his life.
Wow, that is deep. Um, I would like for you to talk about non-government funding, our responsible fatherhood initiatives. What do you think the prospects are for nonprofit organizations to acquiring significant funding from businesses, charitable foundations, and private high net worth individuals?
So that's a great question because one of the things that I worried about when I created the grant program at the federal level is that some programs that really didn't care that much about fathers would chase the money. Uh, or once the money dried up, they would stop doing fatherhood work. Uh, and that's a legitimate concern because there's an old saying that public dollars crowd out private dollars.
Hmm.
Um, but there's never going to be enough money at the federal level to deal with this issue at a more societal level. And so uh, there has to be other kinds of funding streams and other kinds of ways to think about doing fatherhood program outside of the federal grant program. So first of all, if you're a church, a synagogue, a mosque, a lot of those places of worship have programs for families. They do. It's part of their
Hmm.
mission.
Hmm.
Uh, there's ways to equip those places of worship with specific information about how to help support responsible fatherhood. And my experience is they're more than willing to do it.
Hmm.
Um, the the other is to make connections in the business community and help them understand why good fathers are good business.
Mm.
It's what's the first of all, uh, one of the things about men. Somebody once wrote that when men are unattached to children and families, they engage in stupid men tricks.
Mm.
Yeah, they 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 stay out late at night. They drink too much. They might do drugs. If they wake up in the morning on Tuesday and they don't feel like going to work, they say, "I'm not going to work," so they lose their job. Um, But when a man gets connected to family and the children, they start to think outside themselves. They have a responsibility to something other than themselves. And suddenly, what happens? They start to organize their lives because they know they have a responsibility. So they start to when they wake up on Tuesday and they're tired and they don't want to go to work, they go, wait a minute, I got to go to work because I got this child who depends on me to earn money to bring to the family. I can't stay out at 3 o'clock in the morning and be able to work, get up and go to work. I just can't do that. I can do that on Saturday, but I can't do that on, a Tuesday night. I can't drink all the time. They stop doing those quote unquote stupid men tricks.
Mm-hmm.
That's good for businesses because they
Mm-hmm.
become better employees.
Wow.
They also contribute economically to the community. They're less likely to engage in behaviors that are destructive to communities. And so convincing businessmen that good fathers is good for business, both in terms of their own employees, but also the greater community, I think is one way we used to go to businesses and ask businesses to contribute to us at the National Father Initiative with making that argument. Then there are some foundations that do fatherhood programs. Used to be more. I'm a little disappointed that some of the foundations have retreated from funding this work. But there are some foundations, particularly community foundations. So, everybody thinks about foundations. They think of the big one, the Rockefeller Foundation, and so forth. But there's lots of smaller community foundations that want to fund work in their community, and they get small grants. But a lot of fatherhood programs don't need $2 million grants to do fatherhood programs in the community. They'll give you $50,000 to do fatherhood programming in your community. So think about approaching community foundations as a way of also getting some resources to help with their fatherhood programming.
Wow, that's very helpful. Could you please talk to our audience about the role of fatherhood organizations have or should have in engaging the mothers of disconnected children in responsible fatherhood services?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
and then also, well, I'll let you tackle that one first.
All right. So again, a bad fatherhood program would set up a context where mothers and fathers are fighting. Okay, that's a bad fatherhood program. What you want is whether they're married or not, living together or not, what you want is to help fathers and mothers work together for the sake of their kids.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to necessarily stay together for the sake of their kids, but they should always be working together for the sake of their kids. Now, this is harder than it seems, okay, in a lot of circumstances. There's been a lot of people who've written about the fact that mothers are kind of the gatekeepers to their children.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true, by the way, of in the home married mothers.
Mm-hmm.
They because they have this sort of protective function. A lot of them, they sort of, my wife did. I said the story. She goes, now you can go upstairs and say goodnight to the kids. They gatekeep around their children, and what that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing if it keeps the father away.
Mm-hmm.
And that particularly is an issue with non-custodial fathers.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of what needs to happen is for both the moms and the dads, even if they're not living together, they're not in love with each other anymore, and they're either divorced or they never were married, that they still need to come together and work together as a unit for the sake of their kids. I hate the term visiting dads, visitation.
Mm-hmm.
When I interact with my kids, I'm not visiting my kids. I'm
Right.
being a father to my kids. I hate that term. I've always hated that term. I also don't like child support enforcement as a phrase.
Mm-hmm.
I get why we use it, but think of the difference it would be if we rename child support enforcement family engagement, and we just said it's family. This is a family engagement program.
Mm-hmm.
It's not child support's important, and we're going to help If you're not paying and you can, we'll help you start to pay. If you're not paying because you can't, we'll help you get a job, the resources you can start to pay child support and so forth. But at its core, if you say this is about family engagement, part of family engagement is supporting your children financially and also allowing both parents to be engaged with them psychologically and emotionally, and not just economically. I just think we could change the way we think about that entire system if we just changed the, the name of the office.
No, I agree. I remember doing, I think we talked about it before the show, is I did a street ministry. And, when I called the evangelism team, people ran because they felt like they needed to know the Bible. They needed to be this expert evangelist. But then when I said heart for the harvest, oh, everybody wanted to participate because, I mean, it's just the name itself changed the whole dynamics of the whole situation. And so I totally agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, it's messages matter. They just do, uh, and we just got to get the message right. Yeah, we don't always get the message right. We're getting better. Back when we started the National Father Initiative in 1994, there was a developmental psychologist, very famous, by the name of Michael Lamb, and he said that fathers were the forgotten contributors to child development. And they're not so forgotten anymore. We've still got a ways to go, but it's the rare person today that says, fathers really don't matter. It doesn't matter as long as they give money to their kids. The kids will be just fine without them. We don't need those guys hanging around. People used to say that routinely back, in the 1980s, early 1990s, when we were in danger of losing that father idea. Today, it's you don't hear that as much, and that's a very good thing. Still have a long way to go, though.
Absolutely. The other part that I wanted to ask is, what are some of the government agencies that should be directly involved in this aspect of fatherhood work?
All of them. all of them. If there's any message you hear from me today, it's this. This is something all of us should be involved in. So if you're a businessman, you should support fathers just the way that you support mothers. Don't set it up that says, oh, I understand moms might want to take some time off after the birth of the child, but the guys, I expect you to be back at work the next day. Why not? You're the guy. You're not the mother. No. Businesses need to understand to treat men as fathers the way they treat women as mothers, and support them both. Churches need to see this as essential to their ministry. It's interesting. The way that children who then become adults see God, their image of God, is often a reflection of their own fathers.
Absolutely.
And so if they have a distant, cold father, then they see God as some distant, cold, being. If they have an abusive father who's revengeful, they see God as a very revengeful. If they have a loving, involved, supportive father, they tend to see God as a loving, supportive figure as well. So churches have, because I think most churches, because I believe it's true, want their congregation to see God as a loving, supportive being who cares about them deeply. And so they have a stake in this game, this fatherhood game. So when it comes to government agencies, I can't think of a government agency that shouldn't see as part of its mission, and every once in a while, question, are we doing enough to engage fathers and being supportive of men in their father role? I think every government agency, I can't think of a single one. Education, of course. Why is it that PTAs are like 90%, 95% women? Why aren't the men in the PTAs? Well, there's one of two ways we can think about that. We can say, it's because the guys don't care. Or we could say, we're not being inviting enough. We're not doing enough outreach to guys to get them to want to come to PTA meetings. You can guess which one I think they should conclude. But for far too long, we concluded the other, which was, they don't care. Guys don't care. And so education is important. We talked about businesses. So the commerce departments are important to get businesses engaged in this. Obviously, social service agencies should be engaged in this. I really can't think of something far afield. Transportation. What Department of Transportation? Well, if you want your kids to be safe drivers, don't be a knucklehead behind a wheel yourself. Because then when your kid grows up and becomes, he's going to be a dangerous driver behind the wheel. So make sure you are and we'll reduce traffic accidents if we have fathers understanding that children are going to do what they do, not what they say. And if they see their fathers racing around and getting involved in road rage and all of that, but then when they teach their 16-year-old, 17-year-old child to drive, they go, I want you to be safe. I want you to, don't you? Which of them are they going to go? So I think the answer is all. We all have a stake in this.
Absolutely. One of the things you talk about as far as the churches, I just want to say, so when I wrote my dissertation, of course, most books and literature that you read comes from, especially as it pertains to fatherhood, it comes from a sociological or a psychological perspective. Very seldom do you see it coming from a theological perspective. And so I talked about in my dissertation, because it was a seminary, I talked about God the Father, a perfect God, and Jesus Christ, the perfect Son, which is the blueprint, and like you said, most churches you would think would want to do this because again, it would build strong churches, it develops strong relationships, strong marriages, strong communities. I mean, and God is the center of it all. It makes sense to me.
Right.
But we still have some work in that because unfortunately divorce rates and single father homes is just as high in the church as well as out.
That's very much true. That's unfortunate, but it's very much true.
I had another question. Also, what are some of the activities that fatherhood organizations can develop in order to ensure that both fathers and mothers are comfortable and successful in such arrangements?
So again, I think part of it is making sure that we uh, do outreach to men in ways that connect with men, so they come in the door, because you can't help them if they don't come in. You can't support. If they don't come in the door, you can't support them. And so I think that that's important. And also think that, and this goes for women too, people don't like to be lectured at,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't like to be lectured at. They don't like to be scolded. They don't like to be told they're doing everything all wrong. And so one of the things that when I was a practicing therapist, that I did is you start where the family is. You don't start where you want the family to end up. You start where the family is, and you start to move them in a direction to where you want the family to. So if you've got a couple who are at each other's throats, and they're arguing all the time, and they're the urge of the divorce. If you say, well, this is what I want you to do, and this is what you're going to look like, and so just stop all that stuff. I mean, it's just help them give the skills so they can communicate in ways that don't escalate into big arguments or even worse, violence. So we have to give them skills to do that, but you have to start with where they are and then move them incrementally towards a better place. Otherwise, they'll just leave, and you can't help somebody who's not in the room.
That is so true. I think that's great advice. I'm praying and it was that people are hearing what you're saying because there are some people that's out there that are probably looking at trying to start a fatherhood program, uh, and really don't know how to do that outreach, or how to even get these men involved or engaged into these type of settings, because as you said, a lot of times uh, services are not very father friendly, you know, and so that's why they don't want to be there. As you well know, there's an ongoing need for the continual delivery of effective fatherhood services, the existence of strong and steady advocacy for the work, continual promotion of effective fatherhood policies, and regular development of up to date fatherhood related research. Considering that many caring professionals who come into fatherhood work leave due to inadequacy of funding for staff, or take better paying jobs, what are your thoughts about how the best of these professionals can be the retained in fatherhood organizations?
Yeah, this is something I really have thought long and hard about, because taking a vow of poverty should not be the entry point for working with fathers. Uh, and we as a society have to be better at supporting uh, those who have a heart for working with fathers. Um, and I, you know, back in 2005, $150 million was appropriated. The appropriation here, 2023, is $150 million.
Mm-hmm.
So didn't even keep up with inflation. Um, and so maybe it's time to think about, hey, should the federal government, up the ante a little bit and put a little bit more money into their fatherhood grants? What about states? States have big budgets. Uh, you and I are working with the state of Tennessee, that is starting a fatherhood initiative, and part of that's going to be a grant program for state-based fatherhood programming. More states should get into the business. There's no reason why states can't be funding their own fatherhood programs. It's perfectly allowable, for example, under the TANF program. TANF is the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. And one of the things you could do, one of the purposes is family strengthening. Well, by definition, fatherhood programs is about family strengthening. Why don't some states take some of that money and put them into fatherhood programs? Um, and then I think that as I said earlier, I'm a little disappointed that some of the charitable foundations that used to fund this work don't do it anymore. I think there should be some resurgence of charitable foundations funding this work. At the end of the day, those three sources are never going to be sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I also believe that this should be part of the mission of ongoing organizations, churches, businesses, social service agencies. We shouldn't have to ask for additional funding for a child welfare agency to be more welcoming of the involvement of fathers in families that are interacting with the child welfare system. We shouldn't have to give Head Start more money or separate funding for them to be more welcoming of fathers. And by the way, Head Start actually does a pretty good job of this.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't have to give more money to school systems to be more welcoming of fathers, encouraging them to be more involved in PTAs. Just a shift in focus or emphasis or how they outreach to men and to fathers. So that's why I'm a all of the above guy.
Mm-hmm.
What we do, all of the above. There's not a magic bullet. We should do it all.
The interesting thing is that we're live. As I told you, we're going over like maybe more than 150 countries, but we're also live on Facebook and YouTube, and it's amazing because you can see the people that come on and they check out. So even those that's listening to this conversation are not interested in this conversation, and they may be fathers, or they may be mothers, or they may be both. But this is not a conversation that people want to hear.
Yeah, that's unfortunately that's probably true. Although I like to believe there even if it's just two people out there who sort of wandered in and saw this on Facebook, turned it on and kind of had playing over their shoulder as they're doing something else, but something attracted them, something you said or I said, and suddenly they sat down and focused. This
Absolutely.
is, one of the slogans we had at National Father Initiative was "Fathers change the world one child at a time." We change fathers one father at a time.
That's my slogan for man to man. Strengthening fathers one father at a time.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
We got a final question that I have for you, because I told you this time was going to go really fast. It's 4:56, so we actually have 4 minutes left on this show. So finally, a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed one of your former colleagues, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, on this program. I told him that my sense is that there's some of the viewers in more than 100 countries, 150 countries, whatever you want to call it, might be interested in developing responsible fatherhood initiatives in their jurisdictions. Assuming this is the case, what advice would you give them regarding A, inspiring policymakers to support responsible fatherhood work, and B, developing organized and sustainable fatherhood policies and practices and advocacy in their respective jurisdiction?
And I have all the 3 minutes to answer that question.
No, you can go longer. Don't worry about it. Go ahead. So, I know that's a setup.
So, first of all, one of the things that has changed since 1994 is there's a lot more resources available to people who want to get involved in this work. The National Fatherhood Initiative is a example of a resource that, and I think you're involved with the National Fatherhood Initiative in some level, that they help. Part of their mission is helping community-based organizations who want to do fatherhood work, equipping them with materials and resources to do that. There's Jeffrey Johnson's organization does the same thing. James Rodriguez, his group that's having their fatherhood conference, I think actually this week,
in Los
Angeles. They have resources for men. That simply did not exist in 1994. And so the first thing would be to go on the internet and start to search for fatherhood resource materials and fatherhood resource organizations. And the ones you want to connect to are the ones who see as their mission, equipping other organizations and others to do this work. The others are fine, but you asked about how somebody gets started. When it comes to advocacy, depending on the country you're in, it may be of course, that fathers matter. But in some countries, it may be, what are you, crazy? Fathers Day, that's old. That's old school. That's Aussie inherited land. That's terrible, and so you're going to have to figure out the context in the country you're in. What is the status of the fatherhood idea in your country? Is it widely supported or is it widely forgotten? And you're going to have different strategies depending upon the context that you find yourself in the country where you're located. And it's going to be a tougher road in a country where the fatherhood idea is eroding than in one where that's embracing of it. But there's hope because, as I said, 1994, this was not a foregone conclusion that we were going to be able to recapture the fatherhood idea. And I think it's a constant struggle, Sorry, I think I may have just. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
You paused for a minute, but I hear you.
Yeah. So anyway, so I would go search out for those organizations who see as their mission to provide resources and material for those who want to start a fatherhood program. There's also a lot more books on the subject than there used to be. I wrote a book called The New Father Book back in like 1995. It was like one of four books on fatherhood at the time. Now there's like a gazillion. Uh, and uh, so you also start to read, about this. And then, take a self assessment of the context in which you operate, whether that's a country context or what about your employer? Is your employer, do you have a sense that your employer is father friendly? Um, or welcoming your church, your place of worship, kind of do a self-assessment about the context you're in and then kind of go from there.
You just said something that I'm going to give you a few more minutes. I mean, you did a really good job in summarizing that and in the time that you had. But you said something about your book. I would love for you to tell the viewers how they can purchase your book or where your book is located.
So it's on Amazon.com. It's called The New Father Book. It's by Wade Horn and Jeff Rosenberg. So there's still some copies left, and some of them are used copies, which I encourage. Recycle them. But you can get a copy there on Amazon.
Absolutely. So I am in the process of writing a book as well on fatherhood, and
Good for you.
you would definitely be the first to know when I finished it. It has a
Please
lot to
do.
do with my dissertation and then my own personal life experiences as far as what I've experienced as a father. And so love to let you read it and see what you think about it as well.
I'd love to see it.
Well, thank you. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out. I know the time is of the essence, but you are 3 hours ahead of me, and I know you're a busy person. I just want to thank you so much for coming on to Can We Have a Conversation and having uh, this discussion that I believe that many people have been enlightened about this subject matter. And so I want to thank you again for joining us, and I will see you in Ohio and in Tennessee.
That's great. I've really enjoyed this. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining. Can we have a conversation? If you are on YouTube and you're watching this, click the button, share, uh, join, subscribe, so we can have other conversations like this and that we can get the word out and that we can continue this movement as it pertains to fatherhood, motherhood, strong families, strong marriages, and just building a greater and a stronger community. Until the next time, God bless you. Go with God as God goes with you. God bless you.